Uh, this is the fifth in the series of Lunch and Learns. We set out to do six, and you're welcome to it. We've had quite a large group of people interested in these topics. I think some of them find it useful. You know about us at this stage. Most of you will have been through the other four. A couple of things. There is a question. You can ask questions if you want to type a question in. Fiona's in the background looking after that. And we're recording the session, and it'll be available also. The slide decks we'll share as soon as the session is over, or very shortly after. This one is about how to manage third-party risk. Fairly topical, but in some cases regulated. And we'll go through that very, I want to say, we certainly discuss the source regulation as we go through the webinar. So this is why outsource and why you use third-party providers. And you'd be trying to do a criticality assessment when you're doing this. And I know many of the people that are on the session will already have third-party providers of all sorts of things. So sometimes you do it to get additional skills and boost capacity, increase efficiency. Modern technology, modernization, sometimes the providers are ahead of you in terms of technology and the kind of stuff they can do, or you might be out looking for that rather than invest in other stuff. In many cases, it's a legal requirement. Bottom line at this is, whatever you're looking for, be clear why you're outsourcing and be clear about what you're outsourcing. And once you've done that, there's a reconfirmation process that goes on it as well, but basically know why before you go looking. The next key piece is the agreement. So there'll have to be a documented agreement with the third party. Now, some of these, it depends on the nature and size and scale of the third party, but generally you go through an initial due diligence process that is followed by a legal agreement. Key to this is know what the service level agreement metrics are. And if you've got, depending again on the scale and the type of contractor, the type of outsource that you're buying, you design your metrics. The big ones will probably have a set of metrics already. But at the same time, you need to measure and monitor those to make sure they are meeting whatever is written in the agreement. You'll be looking at things like their reputation and experience, check references and published testimonials, and again, the metrics. Schedule regular meetings or regular contact, and ideally you should have known contacts in the organization, and you should have access to a help desk that is reasonable, and you know yourself by testing that on an occasional basis if you have to. You'll know how that works. Again, it very much depends on the criticality of your vendor, your outsourced provider. One of the key things you want to look for, notification of any change. And in the contract, there should be a termination clause. You want to know if we want to get out of this, if we want to change, how do we do it? Do we have access to our data? That kind of thing. Generally, these would be boilerplated, but at the same time, it's very important to make sure that they are part of your agreement, particularly if you are sharing personal data that you are the controller of, and you're asking the outsource provider to process that data. Your data protection obligations don't transfer. You are still responsible for that data as controller. Why do you manage the risk? Well, some cases it's to satisfy the obligations. No matter what you do, you still own the risk. No matter what they do for you, you still own the responsibility for whatever function that you're outsourcing. So essentially, you still own that. I mentioned some of the regulators there, and at the end of the document, there are some very specific regulations. We've attached some links to those at the end of the session. So if you want to go and do a deeper dive on any of this, you can. So some of the things you're looking at, if they fail or have a disruption, how does that impact you? You'll do that in the criticality assessment. Talk a little bit about the criticality assessment in a minute, but basically what you're looking for is how exposed am I as a result of this outsourcing? And you want it to remain on their responsibility. They need to be aware, and you need to keep them to remind them that they are part of your ecosystem, if you like. They're an essential part of it. And again, that depends on the criticality. So I'm saying, depending on your size and complexity, some of your third-party providers will be at a certain tier. Some of them will be down at different levels. And the degree to which you manage and mind them is proportionate to those levels. One of the things that you need is honesty from them. If they have breaches or incidents, you want to see where you are in their response plan to anything that goes wrong for them. You don't want to be hearing it from your end users or from your clients that they have a problem. So that communication thing is important if they have incidents or breaches or anything like that. This is a view of a systematic third party. This is from the calQrisk system. Lots of boxes to fill in. The criticality issue is discussed here. And when you get your tier ones or your top levels, obviously this gets more filled in. But for the minor ones, it's probably just a good place to store the record of their existence and your contract with them, and probably to trigger some review. The criticality, generally it's 3 layers, tier 1, 2, and 3, or A, B, and C. You probably have your own methodology, or this one is quite common. So what service are you looking for? Very important that you fully understand what you're out there looking for. How critical to your business or your business processes is the provision of that service? And what you're looking for is it something that is short project, or is it something that is continuous? And if it is continuous, obviously, you need to know and have metrics on the availability, the uptime, things like that. If it's connected to a regulatory activity, remember, you may well have to report on it. You will actually have to report on it if asked by a regulator, and you will need to know and be able to show the quality of the service, if you like. Level of dependency is another big issue. So really, you're looking this tier 1 criticality. If you are honestly saying, if I don't have this service, I am in real trouble. So that would inform the criticality. And that is advising the impact, the potential impact of a failure of the service. You need to look at where the risk sources are. We'll talk a little bit about risk assessment in a minute. And one of the things that is useful to know is there a comparable alternative. So if this failed, if this provider failed, is there somebody else that you can go to that you know could provide you with the service, albeit perhaps at higher cost, or perhaps with some delay? And then finally, I'll talk about the delay issue. You need to know in the criticality assessment, what's the lag time between failure and recovery? In business continuity terms, these are termed the maximum tolerable outage, or the recovery time objective. So basically, how long can you be without this service? And really, that's informing how long you need it to take, the limit on the time you need it to take to get it back. When you've got those issues, you'll find that it feeds into your business continuity planning and your recovery around the business continuity if there's a failure of this service. And you should be part of their business recovery, their maximum tolerable outage as well. And that communication should be ongoing. So one of the question sets to ask one, if they're critical, if they're tier 1 criticality, you'd want to know that you are part of their business continuity plan. So when do you do the assessment? Obviously before the legal agreement, because you can write certain things in there. When you're dealing with very large providers, you probably have relatively little, if in fact any, influence on their legal terms and conditions. and they'll be written in small print anyway, so very difficult to figure it out. But yeah, get strong, solid legal agreement and understand the terms and conditions, and then check it again during the relationship. So you may have a contract that's continuous, and every couple of years, just go back and make sure that the criticality assessment that you did at the beginning is still valid. Actually, you'll be doing that assessment anyway around the reason you outsource. I mean, there are things that happen that may cause you to take this back in, for example, or you may want to check on the skills. Are they maintaining their skills? There's things you will want to do in that assessment that includes the review of the service level agreement metrics. If there's a big change in their organization, for example, mergers, acquisitions, they're happening all the time. And if one becomes part of a bigger organization, what happens to the service level? That's time to revisit that criticality again. And if they have an incident, either you or they have an incident associated with their service, and always worth having a look at the criticality prior to the renewal of the legal agreement. This is a typical third party register, and you can see down the side here the tiers. So usually the tier ones will be at the top, and so on. Very good to have a register, because what it does is it keeps them all in focus in the same place. Some of the smaller ones may well be significant, very significant. And I've put in here a question, does size matter? And the answer is probably not. If you're small and they're big, they'll have all sorts of issues. They'll have their standard terms and conditions, they'll have all of that. And to check, and I put in probably not here, and the reason is, if it is not an adversarial relationship, if things are okay, it doesn't matter what size they are. If they have similar clients to you, same sector, they're providing the same kind of service to a lot of people, and you know a lot of the people that are using them, they're anxious to retain. So the big ones, that relationship is fine. Size doesn't make that much difference. If you are a big part of their business, again, if it's not adversarial, and it's more likely when they are smaller, and you're a significant part of their business, that their anxiety to retain you will be more serious, and therefore the relationship will be closer. And basically, you know what choices they have, because they will probably be looking to grow. Just as the big ones, you will know what choices you have in terms of alternatives. The risk assessment, when you look at the links that we put at the end here, there's an organizational risk framework that the third party may be involved in your risks. So be it strategic, financial, operational, they're all listed there. The business continuity one I mentioned earlier on, that's important, particularly when you're looking at their failure and the response to their failure, or the response to their difficulty. How hard are they working to get you back? Are you part of their prioritization? Do you know when you're going to get back? And the communication cycle that goes on when they're disrupted, and because you were disrupted as a result of not having their capability of their function. So yeah, they happen a lot. Concentration risk happens too with some of the big providers. Again, it just needs to be, you need to be aware of it, and you need to be managing it. Fourth party and subcontracting also, you need to be on top of that. And one of the things that can happen here is you want to know what the supply chain is and the ethical nature of the supply chain, to make sure that there's no outsourcing or subcontracting that might breach the anti-bribery, anti-slavery stuff. So again, you need to know that and get that assurance from them with some regularity. Carry out a risk assessment before finalizing the arrangement if you're at that stage, and make sure the legal agreement is solid. A lot of this is repetitive because it's coming, it's almost intuitive. But really what you're looking at is make sure that across your risk assessment and your risk framework, that any aspect of your risk that is impacted by this supplier is included in this, particularly for the tier ones, full depth for the tier ones, probably less so for the tier twos and the tier threes. It just checked it that it's okay. One of the things that I would just point out here is very important that if you've got a large organization that has procurement, you will have somebody who is responsible for the services or the processes being provided by the outsourcer. Make sure that the procurement people are talking to the process owner, the guy who has the relationship or the girl who has the interface with the third-party provider. Sometimes procurement will drive on thinking that they can get it cheaper. Ask the question and make sure that whoever the owner is involved. That's me. I think I'm on time. So if you have any questions, Fiona, is there anything coming in or?
Yep, there are a couple of questions. So the first one came in when you were talking to dependency. So it's from Beatrice, and she asks, is level of a dependency tied to other connected services and or operations that are dependent on the service provided by the party?
In terms of dependency, yeah, the level of dependency is, I mean, there are certain things that most people, most organizations will contract for certain things that they are totally dependent on. For example, a banking system, you're totally dependent on that. In many cases, communication stuff, the IT security stuff, you're totally, because you don't have the skills. You're expected to have those skills. You can't have a full set of skills. So you're outsourcing. The dependency is related to the legitimacy of the outsource. And the simple things like finding the alternative, it doesn't reduce your dependency, but it informs and improves your response if something happens and the dependency fails you. I'm not 100% sure that answers the question. Fiona, would you have a view?
Yeah, it does. I guess the way I understood the question is the level of dependency tied to other connected services dependent on the service? Well, I suppose in a short answer is yes. That that's how you would measure your level of dependency, is how much of your service and your operations are dependent on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But do remember there's an output side to it as well. So you're looking down the chain to see how dependent are your users, your customers, your people expecting your service, how dependent are they on? So run that back,
Mm.
you know, how, and that's why you wind up with the outsource influencing your risk across all your risk framework. Because reputation is a big one. If a failure happens and your reputation is bound up in that failure, then you can be damaged at a number of levels. You can begin to lose customers. You're more likely to lose customers than the outsourcer.
Yeah. So next question is from Sandra, and she asks, if you complete the third-party module on calQrisk, can you print an outsourced service provider register that's compliant with central bank guidance note?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's straight answer is yes. And to be honest, I mean, normally we don't talk about the system here, but there are custom reports if you want to build it. It's probably there already, but again, a quick call to the help desk or some of the people here, and they'll either take you through it or show you how to do it.
Yeah. Just to say that the developments in the third party reporting was developed in, speaking to customers who have to routinely report to the central bank, the Bank of England, so on and so forth, and other regulators. So yeah.
I'll pop up there for your, I mentioned it earlier on, the useful links. Fiona is a keeper of the useful links and the regulatory environment. So knock yourself out if you really want to do any of these for certainly for anybody in the financial services business. There's an awful lot of regulation, but the general data protection regulation more or less affects everybody. That particularly affects everybody. Some of the recent standards on the IT security as well, they're pretty universal.
Okay, just to circle back to Beatrice's question, so she clarifies, in terms of knowing what operations may also come to a standstill because of a failed service from your third party, which then determines the level of criticality. So that internal assessment. So I think in our second part of our answer, we may have answered Beatrice's question.
Possibly, yeah, the knock-on effect. Um,
Um,
we used to be in the work area recovery business before COVID. And one of the things that's always, well, I wouldn't say surprised people, that we were surprised by initially, but the single biggest failure that can cause you to abandon a building is the loss of water. People think about all sorts of things, power, building been struck by lightning, all sorts of things, but the single biggest and the fastest one is the loss of water. Be amazed how a building is impacted by that. But yeah, the dependencies, I might come back on that dependencies question and maybe do a note on it.
Okay, so John asks, do third party providers typically charge a fee to take part in a risk assessment?
No, they shouldn't. And to be honest, don't when I say they shouldn't charge a fee to have a risk assessment done on them and to answer your questions, but tailor the questions. So if you've got if you're approaching a very large organization, it might even be a self-serve organization to get into a system. I mean, we're talking about people like Microsoft or whoever, or somebody with the banking systems, somebody with particular IT stuff. They will it's in their own interest to have a risk assessment done themselves. If you're going through a due diligence, they'll probably answer questions. They'll answer a set of questions, and they're used to that process. If you look, for example, at any tender these days, the kind of questions that have been asked in the tender documentation before you tender for a state contract, you'll see those. It's expected, to be honest. It's expected. So no, they should not be charging for a risk assessment.
And in many cases, they're obliged to.
Yeah.
This anonymous question, does calQurisk have a set of questions or templates to help commence a third-party risk assessment that complies with the central bank? And if so, can you share it?
We do have a combination of risks and question sets for CBI, DORA. I'm thinking about some of the regulations. The regulatory environment there is quite significant. Specific third party, we probably have a framework for a specific third party, depending on the nature and type of the third party, that would the result of which would satisfy the CBI.
You do have a set of due diligence questions also.
Yeah, the due diligence set probably do that, but whether the central bank would accept that as risk assessment, again, we'll take it away. There's so much material on the third party stuff that yes, the answer is yes, it's there somewhere. Whether we would pop it out as a collective, we may have to pull that together. So Fiona and I would do that quite quickly.
Okay, and there's one other question. So do you have, it's from Denise, and she asks, do you have any documentation or recommendation for areas that credit unions should consider in relation to DORA, where the outsourced provider needs to be DORA compliant?
The straight answer to that is yes. Yes, we do. I mentioned it earlier on, part of the resilience thing, and it's a bit of, we actually have a presentation that Jerry did on DORA. It's quite lengthy and quite detailed. There is a large DORA framework around the CBI requirements, and it was done certainly with the credit union, with financial services in mind. DORA, the bank are not putting immediate pressure on the credit union, but it is anticipated. So yeah, we could probably put something together.
The outsourcing white paper as well is another
Yeah,
that's available from our website.
yeah. One of the reasons we did the 15 minutes was to give you a flavor. Stay away from the 2-hour webinars on these things. But yeah, topically on DORA, we've done a fair bit of work. So most of the stuff will be in there. And we might tailor it. So Fiona, I think you take some notes. We've got some very good questions, and we'd be more than happy to do comprehensive answers on them. So we can take them out of here and come back specifically with a paper on DORA credit unions.
Great. And actually, I think Sandy has some stuff.
I think Sandy has some of it done
yeah.
as well from the advisory service. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, that's all the questions, Paul. Thanks very much for your time and for your expertise as usual.
Well, listen, thank you all very much. Appreciate it. And apologies for running way over the time, but look, it's always good to have an enthusiastic audience on an interesting subject. And as I say, all this material will be shared. Mairead will send it out in the usual way, and the session is recorded also. So any commitments that Fiona and I made in the last 5 minutes answering questions?
I don't remember making any, no.
We'll come back and deal with them.
All right.
Thank you very much. We have one more, and then we're going to take a few weeks holidays. So I'm not sure when the next one is, but Fiona, have you got it? I think it's no, I won't speculate because I'm not sure. And about 2 weeks, and we'll close it up. And then yeah, they're available on YouTube. They're available wherever. Mairead, I think, will tell you where they're available if you want to run back on them.
Great. And so thanks coming in as well, Paul. So
super. Great. Okay. I'll close it off here, and thank you very much for your company. Bye now.